Good morning. It's great to be with you, whether you're on your couch or I suppose soon we'll get to have people in the room, whether you're here in Helena or somewhere else. It's great to be a part of that. So what I want to do this morning is I want to provoke a conversation about this idea that Exile is about waiting. And as I returned to some notes and started doing some of that work myself early this week, I was quickly reminded that a conversation about exile and waiting quickly becomes a pretty somber, even dark conversation. And I was grateful that part of what that did then was it pulled me back into some discipline that we've talked about in years past, and you've likely talked about in your own life in some other context, if not this one, but just the importance of practicing gratitude disciplines. Oftentimes it's talked about get up in the morning and write down 10 things, or even wake up and list 5 things in your head. And so what I want to do this morning is ultimately we're going to talk about waiting, and I think the connection that waiting has both to COVID-19 and this exile metaphor that we're working. But before we do that, I kind of want to set a grateful tone, because for me that's helped me keep in balance the heaviness of all of this. So Tommy and the band have put together this remarkable song. Very, very well done, and I think it'll do a great job of just conjuring up gratitude. So what we're going to do is we're going to transition in a moment to that song, and really to create a cover for you to begin to just right there where you're seated, practice some gratitude. And it doesn't even have to leave your mouth if you don't want, but it would be something like this, like, I'm so grateful that it's in the 60s today. I'm so grateful I live in Helena, Montana, where there's all these outdoor recreation opportunities. I'm so grateful for the team of people who've given of their time to make this gathering happen again. Very, very grateful that my wife and I still have work. I'm grateful for the time that I've had with my kids. I'm super grateful for Governor Bullock and his leadership over these last 6 weeks or so. So just something like that, just to beg yourself to begin to list the things you can be grateful for. And then we'll enjoy this song, and then we'll transition back into a conversation about waiting.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time.
With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light.
And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets are formed. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I.
Out of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, nature and science will follow the sound of your voice.
And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature so alive,
I can see your heart in every canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you, so will I. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I.
If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. If everything exists to lift you high, so will I.
The wind goes where you send it, so will I. The rocks cry out in silence, so will I.
If the sum of all our praises still fall shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. God of salvation, you chased out my heart through all of my failure and pride.
On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die.
And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I.
I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I.
I can see your heart in a billion different ways. Every precious one, a child you died to save. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
So from that place of gratitude, here's the question that I want to ask this morning: is what if exile's about waiting? Now, to be sure, waiting is not something I claim to be good at, and I don't expect you to either. In fact, ironically, I had my own moment of poor waiting this last week. Somewhere around the 1st of April, I decided that for our 20th wedding anniversary, I was going to upgrade Teresa's bike, recognizing that some of the money we had set aside for things like that wasn't going to be used to go on trips anywhere in all likelihood. I thought, I'm gonna get her a good bike. And so in early April, I started shopping, and I don't know about you, but I can obsess over internet shopping and spend way too much time doing that. And I also knew that when it comes to buying gifts, I'm horrible at waiting. And so I made this decision in my head that I couldn't actually buy the bike until May 1st because what I decided is our anniversary is in June and Mother's Day is May 10th, and so I thought I'll split the difference and I'll give it to her for Mother's Day. And so I knew that if I ordered it before May 1st, there's no possible way I could hold on to it till Mother's Day. And so I allowed myself to shop, but not buy until May 1st. And I kind of had this spiritual conviction about the whole deal. Well, of course, part of what I was doing was not shopping for 2020 bikes, but 2019 bikes that were still available new, but there was just a few left. And so what began to happen is I'd find these deals and then they would disappear, and I'd find deals and they would disappear. In the early going, that was a good thing because over time, as I had conversations with different people who know more than I do and did more and more thinking and research, the bike that I was going to get her evolved over time. And then last week, I nailed it. I knew this is the bike I want to get for her. And then I found this really fabulous deal on this bike. And then, of course, the website was smart enough to say only one more available. And so I did this quick, like, okay, God, it's not May 1st, but I'm doing this anyway. Is that okay? Yep. And it's all arbitrary. And I bought the bike. And my thinking was, well, it's going to take a week or two to even get to me. I mean, it's a giant box coming from another part of the country, so that'll buy me some time. And about an hour after I bought it, I got an email saying, I bought it on a Wednesday. I got an email saying, your bike will deliver on Friday. So I thought, oh, that's going to be tough. But then I remembered she worked last weekend, and so it would take away the temptation to give it to her when the rest of us were riding, or some of us anyway. And then Friday came, and it didn't show up. And in fact, it was one of those, like, check the tracking number, and it was just crickets. All of a sudden, it just didn't show up, and there's no information. And I was starting to wonder what was going on. And then on Sunday morning, maybe it was Sunday afternoon, I got a text from the tracking thing saying that it was going to deliver on Tuesday. And I'd already arranged, I'd arranged that it would ship to the office. So my thinking was, I'll just shove it in the corner at the office and forget about it for a little bit, and she will never know. And so when I saw that it was going to deliver on Tuesday, I thought, perfect, because that at least buys another week. And then Monday morning, I was out in the garage doing the garage gym thing, and I got a text first like at 8 o'clock or just a little bit after 8 saying, your bike is going to deliver this morning. And so without even thinking, I quick ran to the car and jumped in the car, and we live about 3 minutes from the office, and I drove down to the office because I knew that we aren't open on Monday, and I know the UPS man and the FedEx man know that as well. And so I thought, I'm going to turn on the lights and open the doors and pull up the shades in my windows, and I even created a note that said, Dear Mr. FedEx man, here's my phone number, call me, I'll run down here, or just leave it, and if you can't leave it, call me and I'll come meet you at your next stop, like basically begging them to somehow accommodate me. I posted that on the outside door, I posted on the inside door, I didn't even tell the staff this, I left the doors open, I went back home. And I was home for about 10 minutes, and I got a text that said, we attempted to deliver your package, but your offices were closed. Which didn't surprise me because I knew it's a small town and they would just kind of go like, oh, they're not even there. So as quick as I could, I ran to my car, I drove back downtown, I thought, I'm going to catch the FedEx guy before he takes off and I'll get it from him there. The whole time not thinking about the fact that I'm not giving this thing to her for a month. So I got downtown, and there's the FedEx truck right in front of our building, and I pulled up and I whipped out of my car, and I went and I stood like a kid on Christmas in front of his little side door thing, and he came walking out of the back, and he looked at me very oddly, and he's like, what do you need, Adam? And I said, well, I'm here to get my package, my box. And he said, I don't have anything for you. And I said, well, I just got a text saying that you tried to deliver it, and nobody was here. And he said, that must be FedEx Ground. I'm FedEx Express. And I said, oh, okay, so what's her number? He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, I'll call her. I'll connect with her. And he's like, oh, I don't know her number. I was like, how do you not know her number? It's FedEx. You're FedEx. And he said, oh, it's two completely different companies. He was very gracious, but I learned that there's multiple FedEx companies in town. So then I said, well, what's her route? And he said, oh, she's usually down here. So I ran to my car, and I jumped in my car, and I just started driving around downtown thinking, I'm going to bump into the FedEx van, and I'm going to get the bike. And of course, what happened is I didn't bump into him, but I did in the same time put my earbud in and call the FedEx 800 number with very little hope that would get me anywhere. But in the realm of gratitude, I quickly got a real person, and she listened to me and my situation, and she said, well, let me call the warehouse and see if maybe they just knew that the offices aren't closed. They might not even loaded it in the van. I was thinking she could kind of dispatch me to wherever the dude was or the gal was, but she went one step further, and a few minutes later, she got on the phone. She said, oh, yeah, it's sitting in the warehouse. You can go get it right now. So I zoomed over to Blaine. I didn't even know that the Blaine Street thing was there. Drove through. They talk about Fort Knox. There's all kinds of security there. Drove in, loaded up the bike, and by 10 a.m. on Monday, my wife was riding her bike. So I'm not good at the waiting thing, and I don't suspect you're particularly good at it either. But what if Exile, and part of what makes it difficult, What if disorientation and part of what makes suffering? What if the whole part of the package is we have to learn to wait? And there are seasons where that's what life asks of us, is to wait. Now, if the word exile is foreign, we've been talking for a couple weeks now about this kind of parallel that's in the scripture. And exile refers to a group of people who in 586 BC lived in Jerusalem. And it was then that King Nebuchadnezzar's army from Babylonia came and conquered Jerusalem. I actually read something interesting this week in terms of how they may have breached the walls. I always just pictured battering rams like Monty's Python or something. It turns out that what became the advanced military way of knocking down a wall was they would bring miners in. The soldiers would perform some kind of protection. They'd bring miners in, and they would dig a massive hole underneath the city wall. And as they did so, they would add timbers, and more timbers as they dug a bigger and bigger hole. And when they felt that the hole was big enough, they would fill the hole full of brush, light it on fire, and then, of course, eventually the timbers would be weakened, and the wall would just fall down into the hole. Now, we don't know if that's how the walls in Jerusalem were ultimately destroyed, but what happened in 586 was these people were hauled from Jerusalem to Babylon. And we call them in the Bible exiles. And part of what exile means is the complete loss of normal, the complete disruption of routine. Suddenly the language and the food and the atmosphere, suddenly everything's different. And what we've been saying is, what if this, and the lifestyle that comes with COVID-19, what if this is a little bit like exile? And what if they can help us make sense of this situation? One of the things that I explored on Easter was this idea that no matter what your view of the Bible, one thing that's all but certain is that the Old Testament wasn't written down until exile. So while there's stories in the Bible and the Hebrew Old Testament, what they would call the Tanakh, while there's stories that are older, of course, than exile, stories of guys like Moses and David, they weren't actually finally written down until exile. And so what that means is as we read the stories, at least for them, they retained them because of the sense that they helped them make of exile. One of the places we see that play itself out is in the Psalms. Well, listen to the way the Psalms speak of exile. Starting in chapter 6, or the 6th Psalm. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am languishing. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are shaking with terror. Psalm 10. Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself, in times of trouble? Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? Again, picture people in Babylon and the way they would have identified with these texts. Here's Psalm 22, one that Jesus made famous from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning? See, these are technically what we would call laments. Lamenting is something people do when they ask God for relief, and God says, wait. One more, Psalm 69. My spiritual director took me here when all of this started, and it continues to just be this awesome representation, I think, of the emotion of this season. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no foothold. I've come into deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me. I am weary with my crying, my throat is parched, my eyes grow dim with waiting for my God. What if exile is about waiting? What if lamenting is about what somebody does when they ask God for help, they ask God for deliverance, they ask God for relief, and God says, wait. Now, you probably have some experience with waiting. Some of you, quite frankly, more than the rest of us. I would imagine that those of you who've battled infertility, there's a waiting that happens there. Or if you're someone who's waited to meet a spouse, if that was a desire, there's a waiting there. I would imagine our friends battling cancer. There's this very vivid waiting that comes from knowing whether or not you're going to recover from this. I would imagine those of you who've lost someone in this stages of grief. I've talked to those of you who've been through divorce. There's this waiting. Will I ever wake up in the morning and not feel this pain? But even if you can't relate to those, you've waited. You've saved for something, hopefully. You've graduated from somewhere. You've married someone. You've booked a trip. You've built a house. You've celebrated Christmas. Like we have some experience with this idea of waiting. But how much more torturous is it when we're waiting for an unknown future? Like maybe it's not just the waiting that's so difficult. It's the reality that we don't even know what we're waiting for. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know what our business looks like. We don't know what our family looks like. We don't know what our routine looks like. Like it's one thing to wait when we know that at the end of the rainbow is a pot of gold. That's Christmas. We know the celebration we're waiting for. It's another thing to wait when you don't even know what you're waiting for. N.T. Wright, in a brilliant article published in Newsweek, my friend Chado shared it with me. You can Google it. It's worth reading. He quotes T.S. Eliot, who in the early 1940s said, sometimes the most appropriate move that we can take is to wait without hope. Because if we hoped, we'd be hoping for the wrong thing. What if exile is about that kind of waiting? This week I found myself returning to a proverb that my friend Brian Hopkins he used to hold it very close and was very good at living it out. I've never been very good at it, but I felt like God was nudging me back to this proverb. And just to be clear, I don't hear audible voices any more than you do. I do the same subjective things we all do. I pray, I read scripture, I listen to friends, but it just felt like God was challenging me to go live here again. Proverbs 17:28 says this, even fools who keep silent are considered wise. When they close their lips, they're deemed intelligent. I still don't think I've done a good job of it this week, but it was this desire that's growing in me to just go like, Adam, just shut up. Like, stop reading this stuff. Stop speculating about the future. Maybe all of it is just your own feeble attempt to deny the obvious, which is we don't know. We're waiting. And I would nuance it a little bit. I would say probably most of us have some kind of vocational responsibility that we have to do some work there. But in general, maybe we would do well to stop the endless speculation and the endless reading and the endless modeling and just recognize that part of what we're doing is we're waiting. And we're waiting for a future that, quite frankly, we don't even know what it looks like. And some would say that is the definition of suffering. And not only do we not know what the future looks like, we don't know the timeline that's attached. Like suddenly waiting for Christmas, which is something if you hang around in church is something that we talk about every year. Advent means waiting. It's this whole season where we're supposed to remind ourselves that we're waiting for the return of Jesus. And I think all that has some importance, but suddenly even that seems trivial, doesn't it? Because when you're waiting for your house to get built, you know that even though it could be blurry, there's some moment where you get to move into this thing. There's some moment where the 9 months pass and your wife gives birth, that there's some moment that's called December 25th, and then you kind of know the future. We're waiting not only for a future that we don't know what it looks like, but we don't know what the timeline is. It's completely nondescript in terms of what's the length here. And again, that brings me back to this idea of the exile. Think of those people. They didn't know. They didn't know whether it'd be in their lifetime or their kids' lifetime or their grandkids' lifetime or their great-great-grandkids' lifetime. And I've been thinking about this as my family, we finished up watching Band of Brothers this last week, which ends on that really heavy episode of when they liberate the concentration camps. But something has clicked for me as I've watched this, because up until this point in my life, when I watched a World War II movie like Saving Private Ryan, you always do so knowing we won, right? We stormed the beaches of Normandy and lots of guys died, but ultimately Eisenhower's goal accomplished what it was supposed to. Something about this has caused me to go, but that wasn't them. They didn't know the timeline, and frankly, they didn't know the future. That's exile. And what if there's a health that comes with accepting that? You know, one of the books in the Old Testament or the Tanakh that really captures this idea that exile was about waiting is a book called Lamentations. So it's a whole book of laments. We think it was written by pastors or priests of some sort who were doing this writing to begin to make sense of exile. And we started last week by exploring that one of the first movements of exile was you look in the mirror and you own your stuff and you begin to take responsibility for what you can. It's a season of auditing. It's a season of self-evaluation and growth and repentance. But Lamentations doesn't stay there. In fact, in chapter 3, there's a corner turned. In fact, if you were to drive a nail through the book of Lamentations, it's a particular spot. The middle spot of Lamentations is, I think, very important. I'd like to read from Lamentations 3, and we'll catch up to what this looked like for these people to lament. Listen, again, in exile, I am one who has seen affliction under the rod of God's wrath. He has driven me and brought me into darkness without any light. Against me alone he turns his hand again and again all day long. He has made my flesh and my skin waste away and broken my bones. He's besieged and enveloped me with bitterness and tribulation. He's made me sit in darkness like the dead of long ago. Verse 16, he's made my teeth grind on gravel. Picture of people that are scavenging for food, and made me cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I've forgotten what happiness is. So I say, gone is my glory and all that I'd hoped for from the Lord. Verse 19, the thought of my affliction and my homelessness is wormwood and gall. My soul continually thinks of it and is bowed down within me. Now here's the corner, here's the center of the book. It's coming up here. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. Dallas Willard's take on that verse, he says, the Lord is all I have in life and what sustains me. The Lord is good. Here we go. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. See, what waiting invites us to do and what we see in Lamentations is they're holding two truths simultaneously. The truth of the brutality, the truth of the suffering, the truth of the questions, and the mercy and faithfulness of God. John Goldingay, this great British scholar, in his commentary on Lamentations, says it this way. Go ahead to that next slide. He says, when we go through tough experiences, the challenge is to own both sets of facts. The facts about the hard things that have happened and the facts about God's love and compassion that are still facts. He goes on to say, far easier is it to hold one set of facts and deny the other, either to deny the difficulty and only talk about God's mercy, or to deny God's mercy and only focus on how bad this is. What if we're in a season of waiting? And what if to some extent to live in a season of waiting is to end the speculation, to stop theorizing, to stop running from the fact that we don't know the timeline or even the what at the end of the timeline. But what did the psalmist know? What does Lamentations know? What we do know is the faithfulness of God. See, here I'm challenged. I, like many, have made a living pointing out the value of spirituality and the danger of religion. But Walt Brueggemann, this very, very trustworthy Old Testament scholar, he points out that there's a dangerous thing that happens when we do that. Because spirituality, he would say, is by definition individualistic. It's subjective. It's about you and your story and your life and the tools that work for you between you and life and you and God. Religion, though it has some of its baggage, he would point out, is about being a part of a family. It's about being a part of a heritage. It's about recognizing that you're not the first person to have to wait. And what a religion can remind us to do is to look back and to see that we're standing on the shoulders of people who are standing on the shoulders of people who've standing on the shoulders of people, all of whom have had seasons of waiting. Suddenly, we're not separated from the story of the people in Israel, of Israel and Egypt. Suddenly, we're not separated from Abraham. Suddenly, we're not separated from David and the cries in the Old Testament to get them out of Babylon. Listen, what if the prevailing wisdom of exile is not only to own our stuff, but also at times to not hide from the fact that we're waiting? Here's the question I've been posing to myself this week, and I found it to be helpful when I do it successfully. And it's simply this, like what would be, Adam, what would be the benefit to your psyche if you just accepted that what you're doing is waiting? Like if you were to incorporate that into your movement in these coming days and weeks, how might you benefit? To just acknowledge, listen, I'm waiting. And I don't know about this event or this timeline or that one, and I don't know about this sport or this activity. I don't know. And again, I think within our nuanced vocations, we all have a responsibility to do more than not know, but not universally. In general, we can go, I'm waiting. And what if we use that as a mechanism to activate, but we are waiting for a trustworthy God who has this long history of demonstrating that waiting, while difficult, waiting while at times horrendous, waiting is a life skill. It's a spiritual skill. It's what allows us to hold both sets of facts simultaneously. This is hard, and God is faithful. What happens for you if you can begin to incorporate more into your everyday processing of COVID-19 and all the disruption, the reality that there's no denying we are waiting, but we're not waiting alone. And with all due respect to T.S. Eliot, we're not waiting without hope, because our hope isn't in circumstances. It's in a God who has a long history of being faithful. I'd like to pray, and we're going to sing another song. God, Lord, I pray that you'd help us be good stewards of this tension. Like lots of things in life, we could run to either extreme on waiting and either be like completely irresponsible or completely spiritualize everything. But Lord, I pray that as we grieve and as we process and as we anticipate and as we hope and as we cry and as our emotions go up and down, and that you'd help us begin to incorporate this ancient practice of waiting and the acknowledgement that we're in one of those seasons. Jesus, thanks that you know about waiting yourself. Thanks for the cross, and that when the world took its best shot, you answered with your own. Amen.
If you would like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us at narratechurch.org or look us up on Facebook and Instagram.